Get started. So nice that you all decided to join us on this Tuesday morning. We didn't expect so many people. This is something we're trying out right now on All Breakfast with the Experts. We want to take people out of our community who have great knowledge and skills to share with you, and create a little moment to come together as a community and learn from one another. So it looks like we'll keep doing this because it seems to work well. My name is Rebecca. I'm Malta's community builder, so I'm responsible for creating events like this and webinars for you, partnerships and stuff like that. So if you have any questions for me, please feel free to come ask after the session. I also have a few other colleagues here as well. Francesca, who's our freelance success manager, and our head of community. So feel free to come up to us if you have any other questions. The logistical things, bathrooms are just on the left-hand side over here. Please eat the food. Help yourself to it. And I might take the one or other picture or video if there's someone who absolutely does not want to be on something. Please let me know. You might use it in social media, just so you know. But please just come and let me know. Okay. Otherwise, I'm going to quickly hand over to my colleague Ronnie to introduce a special program that we have for you as well.
Yeah. Before we start, I take this with me. Just for you who didn't hear about it so far, our Malt Business Referral Program. So actually a super nice program, what we're using since this year. So if you hear something in your network from a client or from, somewhere else who's looking for a freelancer for his project, you can tell us about the details. We're just checking the project, checking with the client, and it's super nice to get some passive income. So if the project will be done by Malt and a freelancer by Malt, then you will get 5% of the project amount. So if it's a recurring project, means it's a longer project through several months, you will get every month 5% of this amount, which is actually super nice for to do nothing. So we're actually doing all the work for you. So all you need to do is to share the details with us. We have also like a homepage for the business referral program. There's also like a type form. You can type all the details in or just let me know. You can send me an email. We will check the project and all the details. And if it's done and we find someone for this project, you will get 5% of it.
We have many, many freelancers who've done it before.
Yeah.
So if you have any other questions about it, then please ask.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. And then without further ado, just for the people who are joining virtually, can you hear us okay when we're speaking? If there's some problem throughout, please just send a message. We can see it on the screen over here. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Allison, who has. I think it's okay if you leave it here. I think we should say something. Okay. But thank you for joining. And look forward to. So I'm not sure if this one works. Otherwise, I'll put it on the arrow here.
Great. I will apologize in advance for my voice. I did the unthinkable in this season, and I went to a music festival weekend before last, and like everyone else I'm sure there, I got sick. So I swear I'm getting over it, but I still sound a little rough. So I'm Allison Fisher. I'm CEO and co-founder of Verdas AI, co-founder of Verdas Ventures, and I work primarily in AI ethics, training, and AI consulting. So the topic here is kind of how to leverage AI responsibly as a freelancer. So how can you use AI to be more efficient, but also not get in trouble? But maybe to establish a baseline, who is already using AI in their freelance work? How are you using AI in freelance work? Just out of curiosity.
Name variables.
Sorry?
Name variables and stuff.
Okay.
This is more like
Okay. What else?
research.
Research. Creating content. Creating content. Nice.
Generating.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Fantastic. So I think you guys have a good baseline. I will kind of start by explaining who I am. So as I said, I'm a co-founder, CEO of Verdas AI. I got into AI around 6-7 years ago now, and into AI meaning I am not a technical person. So I don't pretend to be a technical person. If you take one look at my CV, you will instantly know that I can't pretend to be a technical person. I come from humanities and education background, and I got into AI by starting to build academies and building AI training programs. So that's the way that I come through it. And my very first consulting project in AI was not about ethics at all, but it was around integrating AI into a university setting. And at the end of that, like 3-month-long analysis, I realized like, oh, no one's thinking about the ethics of this. And that's really troubling because it's a university setting and it's directly deployed with students and nobody's thought about what that impact might be. So that's how I ended up kind of where I am. But also in terms of my journey as a CEO or a business owner, we are completely bootstrapped. So what that means, you know, it sounds nice, like we're a bootstrapped startup. What that actually means in practice is that we did a lot of freelance projects, right? We did a lot of freelance projects that weren't fancy, that weren't even in our core area of expertise. We did Scrum Master stuff. We did whatever it took to pay the bills, right? And sometimes we did a lot of that at a time, in addition to trying to take on paying work that was like actually in our core area of business. So we focus a lot on using AI to be as efficient as possible, while also trying to actually, you know, eat our own dog food and do it responsibly in a way that we could, you know, go to our clients and say, hey, this is what we do. And we would actually recommend that you do that as well. So I don't think you guys need to see this, but there, the Malt AI trend report talks about how there's been this enormous rise in the demand for AI savvy freelancers. And of course, there's this demand for tech talent. Everybody knows that there's this huge demand for tech talent. But there's not only a demand for tech talent. So for those of you who maybe don't, or like me, don't have a technical background, there are still a lot of opportunities in this space. And actually, the focus on AI ethics, on training, on capacity building is really growing. And in addition to that, in addition to this, you know, huge increase in demand, there's a big increase in supply, but there's also an increase in so peer-reviewed studies are actually showing that there are benefits from AI from a worker's point of view. So improved efficiency, improved quality of output even when AI is integrated well. And there are a lot more posts and freelance positions available for people who can make good use of AI from a user point of view, not from like a coder, engineer, developer point of view. Okay, so increasingly you see job posts that are like someone who's really good at using ChatGPT, right? And that means that also people in the workplace are recognizing and clients are recognizing that this is a valuable skill. Also means that we don't have a huge amount of choice, because if we're not being more effective and we're not being more efficient, someone else is, right? So I think you guys already talked about some of the ways that you're using AI to increase your efficiency, to increase your effectiveness. And I think the multiplying factor is the thing that's most important that we focus on internally. So if you think about basics like task automation, so looking at things like automating your scheduling, your invoicing, your project management, right? That's basic stuff. Content creation, everybody already is talking about that, right? You can use ChatGPT, you can use something like Canva. Now you can have these things talk to each other and create something. And then client communication, right? Helping you draft emails. I mean, in the previous days, I would spend a long time kind of agonizing over an email to a client. And now I take a page from my husband's book, which he's an engineer, and he like hates making emails polite. So he just writes the email he wants to write, and then he gives it to ChatGPT, and he says, like, make this professional and nice. And then, you know, it takes his like, you know, why didn't you do your job the first time? You know, you're clearly incompetent. It takes that and like makes it professional. So I now do that as well. As a former English teacher, this is very painful for me, but it saves me a ton of time of like agonizing over the right way to say something. It gets me that much closer, right? So of course we have all of these tools, but the place where we get the biggest gains are when we kind of push them all together, right? Especially in a freelance situation. So you guys already, I think, are pretty savvy and aware. When I think about task automation, I think about tools like Fireflies, Mindy, Motion, Otter. These are things that can both do like transcription or notes, things like that, but also automate actions from those. Content generation, I think this is the one that's like everywhere on social media. We all know that we can use ChatGPT, Jasper, Meta. You have VPN to use Meta at the moment, but for communication, design and creative, you have Dolly, Canva, Gamma.app, if anyone's using something like that, Midjourney, which is increasingly less relevant, but still can be nice sometimes for image generation. And then for communication, you have AI tools increasingly embedded inside the tools we're already using. So it's just a matter of taking advantage of them, right? In LinkedIn, you can use AI to draft a first draft of a message. In Salesflow, these automated sales tools, you can set up automated flows to reach out, to do cold contacts, and then to respond. And you can also use AI to help you generate those messages, both the initial cold contact and the follow-up, and any other automated message you might want. And things like HubSpot and Monday all also have these kinds of things built in to automatically generate a response or a follow-up after a meeting or something like that, right? And of course, this makes you faster, right? It makes your work more scalable, because even if you're only taking 10 minutes to write an email, a really important email to a client, and you can do that with the same quality in 2 minutes, right? Then you can deal with that many more clients, or that many more difficult clients even, right? It also takes some of that really annoying repetitive stuff off of your desk. So you can manage that. And then a couple people mentioned like idea generation. So it is possible, right? If we use these tools in a kind of smart, lazy way. I won't say a not lazy way, because essentially like all efficiency comes from some sort of base laziness, right? Like I don't want to write the same email 16 times and just like slightly tweak the details. Like an AI can do this for me, right? I can give it this base email and say, hey, customize this based on the person that I'm sending it to in my notes, right? And if we use it that way, then we can also enhance our creativity, right? So an example of a project and how I would put all of these tools together. And I'm guessing this is pretty similar. So I'm also curious to hear like which alternative tools you guys are using in a workflow like this. So for example, I would attend a meeting with a client. So this is an example from a project meeting, a client project that we're working on right now. And I would attend that meeting with my AI assistant. So it shows up in the chat. Everybody can see that it's there. It takes notes. It generates action items and assigns them to people. And then it sends me an email or I have it send me a Slack message. So it sends me a Slack afterwards with my list of to-dos and like, okay, this is what you have to do after this meeting. So in this meeting, my colleague was assigned a presentation, right? And so she took the topic of that presentation, and it was so she's doing an agile coaching, so again, bootstrapping. She's doing an agile coaching project, and she was given a presentation, like do a presentation on sales. And she said, well, I volunteered to like organize the meeting and the training, but I'm not a salesperson. I'm an agile coach. And they were like, yeah, you'll be fine. Right? You're a freelancer. You've proven to be somewhat effective. Like, just figure it out. Right? And so she told the client very clearly, like, this is not my area of expertise. I can do my best. And they were like, you'll be great. We just want somebody to do this. Right? So she had to start with research. So we do a lot of sales. So she had some base knowledge. She took that. and created kind of an outline of what she thought that talk should cover based on the meeting notes, based on the to-dos, right? And then she used ChatGPT to kind of quickly extract key points and synthesize from the various pieces of research that she found, right? So you can do this this is an iterative process, because first you might ask ChatGPT for the research. So give me top sources on best practices in sales, right? And then you're going to look at that, always the important part. You're going to have to do something. Look at that, get that synthesis, pull it out, work on it again, add that human intelligence. Well, here's my experience of what I've done in my company, or here's what I've done as a freelancer, right? Derive key points and create an outline. And then you can take that, once you have that kind of vetted, improved outline that you've iterated on, then you can take that and send it to something like Gamma. So we use gamma.app, and you send it your outline and it will generate a PowerPoint presentation, right? I mean, it creates a presentation. You can export that as PowerPoint. I put a little iteration symbol there as well, because the presentation you get is weird still, but it saves you a lot of time, right? It's not starting from zero, but it's also not a finished presentation by any stretch. It will be someday, right? Probably pretty soon. I mean, what you're getting now is something that was not imaginable like 9 months ago. So it's great, but don't imagine that you put it in and you're like, yeah, good to go. I just throw that up and I give the presentation, right? So you edit, you check the presentation for accuracy at the bare minimum, but realistically, like, you know, it's going to have things like, finish with a call to action. And that's going to be like a header on one of the slides. Like, that's what it's going to create for you. So it saves you time, but it does require you to think. And then you present that, right? And if I was really going to enhance my automation, I would have my Firefly assistant in that presentation to capture questions, to capture any like issues or follow-ups that came out of that, so that I could improve the presentation the next time. And of course, schedule any follow-up meetings with that team that I presented to. Right? So
can I
yeah.
ask, are you taking some questions in between?
Yeah, anytime.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. In regarding to automation, when you refer to automation, also earlier in the study that you were referring to, is this kind of the level of automation you're referring to, or is there a higher degree of automation meant by automation per se?
This example has a very low degree of automation.
I'm just trying to
yeah, you can get much higher with this. If you have even a tiny bit of tech skill, which I don't, you can get really efficient with this. And you can create automations. I've used something called Lindy AI, which is in the previous list. This one is very kind of full featured and allows for a lot of automation. So you can basically tell it to do take any action after a meeting or after creating a set of notes. So it requires a bit more setup, I would say, to have these higher levels of automation. But if you have a lot of clients, if you have a lot of projects running in parallel, it's totally worth the setup time. So you can definitely get to a higher level. Yeah, but it does require more skills. So, okay. So do you see any issues with this process?
Privacy.
Yeah.
I mean, just starting from the very beginning, if there are a lot of many people in a meeting, I think, especially in Germany, it will not be that easy to get the agreement from everybody that the meeting will be some kind of recorded or transcribed.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is the big thing is all of this is really easy. And it's also really easy to get in trouble. Because, for example, I mentioned that Firefly joins my meetings, right? It joins as a participant. You can see it here, right? They also have a Chrome or a browser plugin. So any browser that you're joining, it will also record from the browser and it doesn't show up in the meeting. It's completely invisible, right? So that means that if you weren't thinking about it, you could have that browser plugin running and recording meetings and violating GDPR left and right. Right? It could also be that even if you ask everyone in the meeting and they say, yeah, I'm totally fine with that, it could violate your client's policies, right? So this is really nice. It works very well, but it requires a lot of thinking at each step to make sure that you're not either getting yourself in trouble or getting your client potentially in trouble. What's the content of that meeting besides me getting a to-do that tells me to go and create a sales presentation, right? Is there, proprietary information in that meeting that's being shared? That's like, agenda points 1 through 3 are meeting this assignment, and then 4 through 5 are all the financial returns for the year that haven't been made public yet. Like, that's the reality of a lot of meetings. And so you have to think about those things as well, right? So it might make our jobs easier, but we do have to think about all of these ethical issues as well. So the first one is transparency. So to your point, it has to be transparent to the people in the call. So any person can be like, yeah, the subject, but it also needs to be transparent to the client, because you need to make sure that it complies with their methods of working and their policies, right? And depending on the area of work that they're in, depending on the industry, they might be more highly regulated. Okay? And so if you're in a highly regulated industry, then you're going to have bigger issues, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you can't do anything in this process. It might mean that you have to just be very careful and use manually created notes, right? You have to introduce more human oversight in that process. Authenticity, right? The biggest problem with AI is that everybody, I mean, how many of you can look at an article on LinkedIn and say, this was written by ChatGPT? More or less. Okay. When I look at LinkedIn, including some of them that my own working students create, I can kind of tell, right? And so then I have to contact my working student and be like, hey, this latest post really looks like it just came straight from ChatGPT. It's fine to use it to be more efficient, but we can all tell that you didn't really look at it after that, right? So we need this authenticity. We have to be able to see that there's a real person in there, and ultimately your clients are hiring you for your knowledge, right, and your expertise, and they can get ChatGPT for $20 a month. So if it's just ChatGPT, then they don't need us, right? So we have to include that. We always have to think about data privacy, right? What kinds of information can we put into an AI tool? What kind of AI tool can we use, right? Should we use one that's based in the EU instead of one that's based in the US or any place else in the world? Those types of things are increasingly important. And then, of course, bias, right? So how do you know that the information that you're getting is actually accurate and that it's fair, that it's representative? Those are things that require human expertise to check. Again, it's not just like, it's funny if the title on my last slide is, call to action, write something here that, encourages people to take action. Like, that's slightly embarrassing. But if it's actually something that's factually incorrect, something that's offensive, something like that is much more problematic.
But one question, what about privacy, and let's say the other way around? I mean, it's not just I offer maybe private or proprietary data to the AI, but what is if AI is giving me data back which might be protected, and I don't know. Could be the case, and then I work with someone else's data in my project.
Yeah, it's especially important when you're using AI tools for coding or development, anything like that, but also for image generation, things like this, right? There are a lot of active cases right now around IP and copyright and generative AI. And those are all things that you want to keep in mind before you kind of use something that's generated by AI and sell it as part of a project, right? So in general, for a paid project, I do not ever use any image or anything that's created by generative AI, right? I tweak text, But I still use stock imagery for all paid projects because those IP questions for me are just too large.
One question is with regard to like marketing and general like a website, for example, this kind of thing. Because when you're a business, it's already a bit a problem, right? And you're already in danger when you use this kind of IP stuff. So, do you have any guidelines on this? If it's good to do this, or should be generally careful about this?
You need to like create content for a website, or
Yeah, for example, because you just said on paid projects, but
yeah, anything that's kind of publicly facing, like on a website, I want to put a copyright on it. So I want to have a copyright on my website, and that means that I need to actually like own and have the right to copyright to all of that content. And so for that reason, like on our website, I also don't use AI generated images, right? For a quick presentation, to make a point, to create a meme, something like that, that's something that, it's not a big impact. But for something else, I try to be really careful about those things. And the other reason to be careful is that this is an increasingly highly regulated space. So this is just all of the activity since 2019, and it's not even all of it. It's like some of the regulation activity since 2019. And you can see that just this year, we've had the EU AI Act approved, the US roadmap for AI policy has come into effect, and they're supposedly starting on it. The UK has gone back on their original decision to not really regulate and have this innovation first approach. And now they're introducing a bill to regulate AI. China has regulations, India has regulations, most of Southeast Asia is working on regulations, Australia, Canada. So this is an increasingly very regulated space as well. And if the areas that aren't regulated probably will be in the next, 6 to 12 months. And I don't think we need to get into the EU AI Act because, unless you're selling an AI product, offering an AI product, it's not the most important thing for you to know about, but you do need to be aware, so you don't need to know all of the details and all of the requirements, but you need to be aware of it, right? That this is going into effect. So it's enforceable as of the 1st of August of this year, right? It's currently only enforceable for high-risk applications. So the UI Act takes a risk-based approach, and it basically has an unacceptable risk category. These are things like social scoring, facial recognition, manipulation, so trying to manipulate people's emotions and behaviors. Those things are prohibited. And then where we currently are is enforcement of high-risk applications, so requiring conformity assessment for applications in education, employment, any sort of justice, immigration, or law. So that means that in theory, if you're using an AI to grade a student's paper, to help filter applications or judge applications for university, those are all considered high risk because they impact kind of fundamental human rights, access to education, access to employment, things like that. Where we will see kind of next year, depending on how quickly all of the harmonized standards come out, we'll see regulation for limited risk areas, which will require, have a legal requirement for transparency, which means that anytime you interact with an AI system or anytime an AI system influences a decision or acts on your data, that you will have to be informed of that. And that includes things like chatbots, which are already becoming more the norm, to have a chatbot say hey, I'm an AI-powered chatbot, I'm not a real person. But it's still not 100%. We still definitely talk to ones that you're like, I'm pretty sure you're not human. You really haven't told me that you're not human. I was chatting with my bank AI on the bus right here. I was very unhappy. Any sort of emotional recognition systems, right? So there are a lot of systems now that sometimes they're used in hiring, but sometimes they're used in other applications to try to recognize people's emotion. there were really negatively covered cases around this in the UK. So where they had a system that they claimed could predict like violent intent. And that was a massively biased system that had to be pulled off the out of use. And then the lowest low risk are the spam filters, video games that use AI agents, right? So it's not that the EU AI Act will now require, like, if you have any sort of automated character in a video game that uses AI, right, you have to meet the super high bar. But there will be a code of conduct, and there will be some like general things. So I would say as freelancers, what we want to keep in mind is kind of like, where does our client work fall in the risk category, so that we can be more aware, right? Of course, you probably know if you're in a subject matter, if you work in finance, if you work in healthcare, you're already aware of those highly regulated areas and where those risks are. But you also want to think about places where it might not be normally such a high risk or highly regulated area, that now if you introduce AI there, you're adding additional burdens or additional expectations there. And I mean, I think we've all heard the cautionary tales. I'm curious if you've heard of any others, but you know, Samsung had to ban ChatGPT not long after it came out because an employee put proprietary code into ChatGPT and therefore leaked it because, right, if you send it to ChatGPT, it actually goes to ChatGPT, right? It doesn't stay local. They take that data, and so they exposed that code base. So they initially banned it entirely. There were also some lawyers in the US and New York who used ChatGPT to write a case brief. And it did, and it was very convincing. Unfortunately, all the cases that it referenced were not real. So it referenced a bunch of seemingly really legit precedent that had never happened. And they lost their licenses to practice law because they had clearly not reviewed this document, right? There are also some very famous ones. At the bottom picture, I know it's hard to see, is someone asked, I think this one was Gemini, for realistic images of 13th century English king, right? And so none of those are historically accurate, I would say. There's also a really famous one of like a black George Washington crossing the Delaware, which I particularly like. And then this one is asking for an illustration of a 1943 German soldier. And one of them is a black man. And there are two women, one of whom is Asian. And so obviously we can't trust the outputs of AI. We have a lot of bias in these systems. We so far don't have a lot of explainability or transparency in those systems. And so when we as freelancers, right, use AI to make ourselves more effective, to make ourselves more creative, we also have to have in the back of our minds that like AI is, I had a friend who refers to it as like generative AI in particular. It's kind of like having a memory impaired librarian working for you. Like, she's really good at research. She's like, she knows right where to find everything, but like she has no short-term memory, and she often lacks context of the real world, right? Like, so imagine that she's had a massive head injury and she's still somehow really good at her job. You like really can't trust what she said. Like, you need to double check, you know? So think of that as someone who always needs to be checked, always needs to be double checked. And, you know, these sorts of issues are things that were originally trying to address bias in the models, right? So this picture in the middle is, show me a picture of a CEO, right? And they purposely introduced bias into that system so that it wasn't all white middle-aged men, which is good, right? The goal was great. But what we got was the AI system, the model can't distinguish between okay, you want me to like tip the scales here. Okay, great. It doesn't understand the difference between that and show me a picture of a 14th century British king. You don't want me to tip the scales there? No, I think we should, right? It's just doing what it was programmed to do, right? It's not making judgment calls. And so we always have to be the one to make the judgment call. So, I mean, my practical tips would be stay updated, understand the limits of these tools, and especially the limits of the ones that you plan to use, right? So really test them. I always kind of like ask difficult questions of any new version, any new model. As I said, I live with an engineer, so sometimes I can just say like, try to break this, and then, you know, he'll come back and be like, haha, I got it to do this. Because he will just ask me questions for 4 hours at a time. But, you know, if you don't have time to do that, or you don't have an engineer at home who wants to do that, you can, you know, there are people publishing articles all the time who test these things as soon as the new version of ChatGPT or Gemini comes out. You know, they take it upon themselves to do these kind of stress tests. So stay updated, take trainings on these topics, test out new tools. They change constantly. You know, Midjourney was really, really useful. And then Meta's new version of Llama came out, and, you know, a lot of those things were instantly obsolete, right? Always keep in mind, as I said, that the client wants you because you're a human being. They could get ChatGPT for $20. And so using AI to augment your experience, your intelligence, your creativity is going to make you more competitive and make you more efficient without sacrificing that human element that AI doesn't have so far. And always test the output. So read the slides, read the text. You're going to have to edit. You're going to have to improve. You're going to have to make changes. And always make sure that you're kind of also thinking about, you know, is this what I actually wanted? Because again, the system doesn't understand the purpose of your request. It doesn't have any context for that. So full disclosure, some of the slides in this presentation were generated by Gamma. But most of this presentation, like, I had to throw it all away because it was in the wrong order. It was, it did say things like, you know, call to action here, right? And also it just didn't have any meat to it, right? Like, I had given it meat, but it did what you see in LinkedIn posts, right? It kind of gave you this like sanitized, like, you know, boring version that comes out, and it's like the, I don't know, like the average, right? Like the average result. So always test the output, always ask if it's really meeting your goal, and always think about as well the kind of larger requirements that are around your industry, your client, your project, before introducing, you know, your chatbot into your meeting to take notes, or for uploading the client's code to, you know, to try to do a bug fix. You always want to check that you're being compliant. Okay, I hope we have time for questions. Questions? Disagreements?
What is your, I mean, all the AI tools you were talking about, I say that's a public tools. They use public data. In that sense, yeah. What is about more enterprise like generative AI tools that use data of the company in a kind of island mode, so they don't share it with the rest of the world. It's just used for that client.
Yeah. These are now becoming super mainstream. So, for example, the Samsung example, they banned ChatGPT, and then they immediately started training their own internal AI, right? So I think at the enterprise level, what you'll see is increasingly, especially for large organizations, In the beginning, they might have just said like, no one can use generative AI. But very quickly, people realized that that's like telling, when I first started teaching way back when, it was at the beginning of Wikipedia. I'm dating myself. And we took a very hard line. All of the professors and we took a hard line. No one should use Wikipedia or the internet for research, right? How do you think that turned out? Right? Everyone uses. I use the internet for research. I use Wikipedia for research, right? It was all about understanding the tool and then using it appropriately. And so enterprise applications for this are absolutely happening. They're still, if you want to talk about the ethics, they're still using the base model. So they're using that data that's been scraped publicly, and we have ethical issues from training and the data acquisition, but in terms of privacy and security, they're much, much better. And it can also be more reliable.
It doesn't share your data with the rest, but of course it uses the rest's data.
Yeah. And it also tends to be more reliable. So you have those guardrails where you don't get the same hallucinations and things like that because you're able to direct the model to only focus on the data that it has. And that makes it much more stable. Whereas if you're telling the model that like use all of the world's data, then it's going to have a lot more random. They all have randomness in the system. But the more that you contain it, the more guardrails you put around it, the more reliable.
What is your feedback you got from the customers if you suggest such, let's call it island generative AI tools in regards to, do they trust that their data is really isolated to them? Because we all know that is not done in their standards computer centers. They still use cloud-based technology.
I would say that trust question really depends on where the company is based and where the person is based. I would say German companies trust much less. Very skeptical. German CEOs, very skeptical of where that data is. American CEOs, Asian CEOs, there's less concern. But I think, there are true on-prem solutions. I haven't yet talked to someone who's running like a true completely on-prem, no cloud storage solution. It's possible.
Yeah, of course, if you have enough money.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not very achievable. But I think it's increasingly becoming more accepted. So I think people are starting to realize, yes, there are European models, right? It's still wasn't in there, but it's getting there. It's not currently benchmarking high enough, but there's a lot of research being done to get European-based models up to performance level, and I think that will help as well. But increasingly, I see customers actually just so worried about falling behind that they're thinking less. So coming from the AI ethics point of view, I'm more like, wait. Maybe let's think about it. Like, which of your data do you need to give access to? How do you need to set it up? Like, what does it actually need? The other question is whether or not customers have data that's high enough quality to do that, and that's an issue. Questions, objections?
Yeah, at which point of time this is not AI anymore, but that's generated by you, like how much percent do you need to change so it becomes
I am not a lawyer, so I don't know the actual answer to that from a copyright perspective. But I would say in terms of ownership, I know that there are currently in the US, the current precedent is that it is not possible to own copyright over AI generated work. So you would need to make it would have to be substantively human, whatever that would be legally interpreted as. So from my old academic days, that would mean like it would need to be less than 20 to 30% non-war content. Right? So you're looking at 70 to 80% your own words. But again, I'm not a lawyer, and that's all currently being, settled in courts. I mean, that's currently an open question. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I say, like, when in doubt, if I need to be 100% sure, then going back to that process, I'm going to use it for the research, for the inspiration, but I'm not going to have it write a single word for me. Like, if I need to be sure, you can still get those efficiencies through the research, right? I mean, I had a research project recently, and we had done all of this research on education and AI, and the client just really wanted this one source. And it was like a 300-page source, and they were like, cite this source, cite this source. It was not relevant, which is why it hadn't been included in our research, right? It wasn't relevant. So I skimmed it, of course, but it was 300 pages. And it was like right before the deadline. And so I did put that into now ChatGPT. There's a Google Colab or Google Notebooks. It's actually a much more kind of like focused research version. And you can upload a specific set of documents, and it will only reference those documents in its answers. And I used that to kind of see, am I missing something? Is there something that I've missed in this document, right? So again, not to do the work for me, but to double check my work and say, like, okay, I skimmed this. I think I caught the key things. I pulled some quotes so I could reference it, right? I did all that manually. And then I said, can you look more carefully at this 300 pages and make sure I didn't miss anything? And that sort of thing is where I would focus that energy when you really need to be sure. I mean, for some things, you're giving it through webinar, you're creating a thumbnail marketing image for LinkedIn, right? For some of those things, maybe the risk is pretty low, the impact is pretty low. But in my other work, we always look at, like, what is the potential, what goes wrong? If something happens, what's the worst that could happen? And if that worst case is really severe, then I just avoid AI out.
One more. There's a lot of dynamics in the tools. Constantly new tools are coming up on the market. And you just give an example of another tool that was out in the market for 8 months, then it becomes obsolete. How do you keep track, or do you have a recommendation on how keeping track on, am I still using the latest and the greatest? For example, when I'm using Perplexity as a research tool, am I still the state-of-the-art tool, or only because I got used to use it, and maybe I have a habit of a century already just because I've used it for half a year? So
yeah, that's really difficult. I mean, I don't want to recommend to you what I do, which is like, my social media is insane because it's a combination of like dog videos and all of the recommendations for all new AI tools, like with, ethics professors evaluating them, and then freelance people who are like, maximize your make 500,000 a month in freelance jobs. And so like, my algorithms are crazy. But it is like, so I monitor a lot of different lists and experts on LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, to see what like people are talking about, like what's the newest thing. I also have we have tech people in our network, and so I will talk with them when something new comes out and be like, hey, is the hype real on this? And sometimes they'll be like, no, it's garbage, right? Like, ignore it. And then other times they're like, yeah, it's totally, everything's different now. Like, use this. So I would say try to find a couple, like there are some good Substacks and things like that where people do a digest of new tools, things like that. Those sorts of things are the things that I would say are more reasonable to keep up with. I don't recommend that you destroy your algorithms so that you see all of the things. But, yeah.
I already recognize that here as well. I mean, the discussion is going, as in many, if you watch webinars about AI, it's always the same. There's a certain point in time when the discussion comes to a tool story, and everybody is talking about that huge amount of tools out there. Is this the most recent one, the best one, whatsoever? But should we go a step back and talk to our customer? what are your goals? What do you want to achieve with generative AI? Not talking about tools. I mean, I think if that first step isn't done correctly or in the right depth, then you will fail no matter what tool you're going to use. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So I would say the answer to the tool question is very much from a assuming that you're the freelancer and you're going to use the tool and you kind of intuitively know what you need, which we don't always know. So maybe that's also an assumption. We can also go back. With clients, absolutely. The most important thing is to figure out the problem that they're trying to solve, not the tool that they think they need, because those two things are usually not aligned at all, right? I mean, if 7 years ago you asked any client what they needed, they would have said a chatbot, right? And 7 years ago, chatbots sucked. They were horrible, right? They're still only okay. They're much better than they used to be. But, 9 out of 10 people that I talked to back then didn't need a chatbot. That wasn't the problem they were actually solving. But all their competitors had one. They had heard that they should have one. So when we talk with clients, we always start with well, what's the problem that you're solving? And then it's also important to get not just the client or the problem that the manager or the CEO or the VP thinks that they have, but getting down to the people that are actually doing the work and finding out what the actual problem is, because that's often a much simpler fix. Often it doesn't mean AI, right? We worked with a client who wanted an AI project, and they literally had 3 people copying. These were expert researchers, really tons of institutional knowledge. They were copying info from one cell in one spreadsheet to another cell in another spreadsheet. That was what they spent half of their time doing. And that doesn't even need AI to fix that problem. You can fix that. We could basically go and say, we can fix this problem for you today. And it doesn't require AI, and it's super easy. So I think you're right. You have to go back to what's the actual problem that you're trying to solve? Does it need AI, and what kind of AI does it need?
Yeah, it's the transformation, the changing mind of the people use that whatever AI you are will implement, because I think that people are still not used to use these tools. They may even think that their managers give them. The managers think that they aren't smart enough, so that they have to use now AI because they can't do it anymore. That shouldn't be the case, because it isn't the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a conversation you have to have. I have an employee who's young and super driven and he wasn't using any AI tools at all. And so when he was creating presentations and things, it was taking him a really long time for simple things, right? Things that we already had content for. So you don't even need AI to generate text. You just need some new pictures, some new layout, like that. And when I talked with him, it was a cultural difference. So he's located in Malaysia, and he was like, well, it's not doing the work. If I use these tools, then I'm not the one doing the work for you, and you're paying me to do the work, so I want to do it myself. And I was like, that's wonderful. I love that. But it would be great if it was faster, right? You can use the tools to make yourself faster, but his bias was a good bias, right? To be more responsible, to be more accountable. And then we had to work with his mindset around, it's not that I don't think you can do it, it's that I just think your time is better spent elsewhere, right? Than finding the exact right picture on every single slide or,
But is this not questionable if you have to rework a lot of the stuff? Because if you get mediocre output, you have to anyway put the work in, and it might be faster in yourself in the first place, because then there's also your personality in there. You know how what you actually get hired for.
Yeah.
And when you look at the systems are at the end of the day algorithms. A lot of systems have algorithms. If that is now an ERP system or something else, it does in certain ways the same thing. It's, in my opinion, maybe I'm naive there, but for me, it's at the moment still just a hype, because it's not at a level where it really gives me something that would work. I work with a lot of big data.
Mm-hmm.
It's not worthwhile to go there to do that. In programming, the same. You get all this code snippets somewhere in libraries. the same way, maybe even better than when you have something what you just question, maybe formulated wrong. Have to rework it, test it.
Yeah. I think that what you say about the formulating the question wrong is huge because in my experience, like I purposely used this tool for this talk because I was like, I mean, I'm gonna say this as an example. So I will be honest, I don't usually use these tools because I like to do it myself. I tried it, right? Because it was my first time, it did take me longer to do this presentation. It would have been faster if I had done it from scratch myself, right? But my colleagues who do this more often are much better than I am at the balance of what they put in and how they prompt, right? So the questions they ask, the amount of content they give it, the format of the content that they give it. So I would say on the front end, and this is kind of to the automation question, right? There's a lot of work in setting up good automation, even if it's non-AI, right? Just simple automation. There's a lot of work on the front end, setting that up. But if you're going to use it long enough, if you're setting it up sustainably enough, then it will pay off over time. And I think something like this is the same. I agree with you, like, you know, it's never going to be, or it's never, I shouldn't say, it's certainly not going to give you an output that's the same as like my voice. You can customize things. You can tell it to learn your voice. Like there are tools that you can do that. But it really comes down to the quality of the prompts right now. But if you're doing presentations, you know, multiple presentations a week, 2, 3, 4 client presentations, and you get really good at this input, then having 4 mediocre presentations to tweak might still be faster for you than creating 4 presentations from scratch.
I just believe that it's at the moment still a lot should out. Because if you think that there are sitting people in Africa that making this web pages, which Google did this 20 years ago by actually telling us, thank you website, so that you be found by our algorithms. I mean, sorry, that's not there where I would say that's not really intelligent, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm not against it, but I'm just saying that these models are not there where they should be for intelligent.
Yeah, I'm also not sure that I would call it intelligent. But I think, and the ethical question of the data processing is a huge issue for me personally. But this is something where I think you're right. It does take a lot. And we're not quite to a place where you can say like, yeah, this is going to create human level output. We're not.
You were saying that AI can drive efficiency. This is what your presentation is about. Can it also drive excellence?
I think humans drive excellence. I think AI is just like any other tool that can help us achieve excellence, but I do not think that AI is the thing that drives excellence. I think it will always be humans. Again, I started teaching when I was telling people not to use the internet, so maybe that's an old-fashioned view, but I think that people are always what drives excellence. And then the way that we use tools in a smart way to support our human intelligence is what makes us excel. I don't, just like any other tool, right? I can use a hammer and nails, but if you ask me to build a table, like it will still be a really shitty table. Because I don't have any skills or talents in that area, right? So the tools are just there to help me do what I am capable of.
Allison, let's be here for a little bit. Just gonna wrap up the big round, but obviously she's here. Feel free to ask questions here as well. Otherwise, thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you very much for all the questions.